When wolf meets dog. Zhanaozen is awaiting the appeal hearing on 37 oil workers. Defending Private Chelak. The defense asked for a new investigation of the incident at the Arkan Kergen-Bora outpost. Banned poetry. The Culture Ministry is against the creative idea of the Azatlık radio. Hello, I'm Asılbek Abdulov and you're watching Vlast KZ on KPLUS channel. O sport, you are peace. These words open the last passage of the Ode to Sport, a poem written by Pierre de Coubertin, the founder of the modern Olympics and the first chairman of the International Olympics Committee exactly a century ago, and dedicated to the Stockholm Olympic Games of 1912. The Baron really believed in the importance of sports as a tool for achieving world peace. Ironically, however, the 1916 Olympics failed to take place due to the World War I, and later the Games were also cancelled during the Second World War. After that, NATO and Warsaw Pact members exchanged boycotts at the 1980 Moscow Olympics and the 1984 Los Angeles Games, the result of the Cold War politics. In the reality of current, relatively unipolar world, such political maneuvering is seen as an artifact of the past century. Sport is still peace, but in a more global sense of the word, with its own modern contradictions and understanding of good and evil. For instance, the president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, is denied accreditation to the London Olympics, as well as entry into the European Union, due to the reported violations of human rights and democratic principles in his country. Nursultan Nazarbayev is not on the blacklist, yet he was criticized at the protests in London and received a letter from the International Foundation for the Protection of Human Rights Defenders. As part of the campaign Olympic Dream, the head of state was urged to release from prison Roza Tulitaeva, a human rights advocate from Zhanaozen, who was previously sentenced to 7 years. A day before the appellate hearing of the Zhanaozen case, more widely known as the case of 37 oil workers, interior troops were ordered to enter the town for stepped-up security measures. Local residents are still afraid of armed forces, but the new rise of protest moods among the people is also quite evident.
Our demands aren't towards the governor's office or the government or KplusTV, but towards the employer. A new labor conflict is brewing in Zhanaozen. On Monday, several hundred Monai Field Service employees went on strike. The KplusTV subcontractor was left without orders, and upwards of 500 people risked losing their jobs. But company management did not provide any reasonable explanations, and on July 24th, employees gathered at the company office in Zhanaozen demanding to meet the governor of Mangistau region. Their demands to be reinstated and get a pay rise. The lowest wages are here at Monai Field Service. Moreover, every other employee has a mortgage. How many times have we approached management to get a pay rise? You know very well that 100 rubles won't get you anything at the bazaar. The governor did not meet the demonstrators himself, but sent his deputy and officials from the employment office instead. They immediately noted violations of the labor code and promised to set up a commission from the labor inspection to solve the issue. I can tell you that laws were violated, and in connection with that, a labor inspection has been set up, the results of which we will see. Employees maintain the spontaneous demonstration is the result of continuous disregard on the part of the employer towards their demands for a wage increase. The company chief executive Demeo Dusingaliyev also refused to answer journalists' questions. I have no time. The task of smoothing out the labor conflict was laid on the shoulders of the new Zhanaozen mayor Sidik Baytrumov. He met with company employees and management, and on that very day a collective agreement was signed promising work until the end of the year. Citizens, we must work understanding each other. There are no jobs, no one will take them away until the end of the year. Therefore, I repeat once again, we must work understanding each other, in unison and in conference. Company management admits to its shortcomings. We have told them as well to work within the legal framework, and therefore I assure you this will not happen again. This is the first labor conflict after the Zhanaozian tragedy of December 2011, which the authorities and employer were able to quickly localize. Sergei Trumov replaced Orak Sarbapev as mayor of Zhanaozian only a few months ago. After the shooting of the demonstrating oil workers in the Zhanaozian square, Sarbapev was under investigation for embezzling more than $3 million. However, on June 22nd, the court acquitted the former mayor. He is detained on charges of corruption, thus avoiding direct responsibility. Secondly, this does not remove the blame from him as a mayor during the events. A legal assessment has not been conducted to this day. The public defendant Yerlan Kaliyev followed the Zhanaozian process over the 37 oil workers from the very start. He took down each witness account and is well versed in the case. In his opinion, the officials are being exonerated one by one. This week, the court announced the verdict in the case of former Zhanaozian mayor Zhalgas Babakhanov. He was charged with embezzlement of public funds in the sum of more than $16,000. Despite the prosecutor's threatening statements, a big term for the ex-mayor could hardly be expected. As a result, Babakhanov was sentenced to 2 years probation and released from the courtroom. He stole millions because very large sums were allocated for city beautification efforts. Even camels were supposed to walk around with golden teeth here, but we have no sidewalks, no roads, nothing. He sold water to farmers, wrote it off as watering of green areas. All of our trees have dried up. These are his actions. Large sums of money. Zhanaozian resident Venera Popova was not allowed to attend the trial by the court clerk, even though she really wanted to testify against the former mayor. She publicly called him a thief while he was in office, which resulted in her dismissal from her job without a pension. She said she got acquainted with Babakhanov's methods while he still served as the chief of the Civil Procedure Code. We didn't receive salaries from 1996 to 2000. They wouldn't even give us money for funerals. We had to fight hard for it. Argisov was the chief accountant at the time. Our wages were spent on municipal buildings for next to nothing by fraudulent means. Kindergartens, schools, former stores. For instance, Babakhanov's brother bought a children's sanatorium for $10,000 and is now raking in money from the hotel he built there. What are the children no longer sick? In total, after the Zhanaozian shooting, 5 high-ranking officials went on trial. Among them were Deputy Director of Kazmunaygas Vladimir Miroshnikov and Chief Executive of Azermunaygas Kikbay Yashmanov. Just 6 months after the bloody massacre of oil workers on strike, 3 of the 5 are free. Former mayor of Zhanaozian Orak Sarbapev, acquitted. Chief executive of Azermunaygas Kikbay Yashmanov, acquitted. Former mayor of Zhanaozian Zhalgas Babakhanov, 2 years probation. Let us take a look at the latest appointments. Major Kozhaev, police chief, who for 7 months ordered his colleagues to perform certain actions. The same Khabylov who served as chief of staff before these events, then became commandant of Zhanaozian and could have told us many interesting things, was promoted and sent to Astana. I am not a judge to make unfounded accusations, but Kusherbayev was governor of the region in the existing rigid vertical of power. These events occurred under his watch, and he knew about all of them and like no other was obliged to assume responsibility. While former Governor Krembek Kusherbayev was appointed presidential advisor, 13 of the 37 oil workers on strike received prison sentences. In the case of 37 oil workers accused of participating in Zhanaozian riots, 3 defendants were acquitted, 21 amnestied or given suspended sentences, and 13 received 3 to 7 years in prison. The workers are once again paying for what management was obligated to do, stop and resolve the conflict. What's sad is the fact that society perceives it as the way things are. What can you do?
Бахчанов Абидин Коянбайұлы, Авезов Қажымұрат Оралович, Мамбетов Ержан Архымжанович, Сабырбаев Нұрболат Ералиевич, Жылқышев Бекберген Жетібаевич, Садигулов Дүйсенбек Есенбаевич, Төлеев Асылбек Беймұрзаұлы, Төлеев Қуаныш Индербаевич, Дұрысбаев Есенқос Қуанышбекович, Адиев Асан Жусепович жөніндегі үкімі өзгеріссіз.
The 10 names read by the Mangistau Appeals Court belong to residents of a small village of Shetpe. In the rebellious December days, they blocked the railroad tracks in their village and demanded to put a stop to the authoritarian chaos in neighboring Zhanaozian. The appeals court upheld Shetpe residents' convictions. 1 defendant was acquitted in the Shetpe case, 7 were amnestied or received suspended sentences, and 4 were sentenced from 4 to 7 years in prison. Relatives and friends of those convicted gathered near the regional court building early in the morning. They hoped the sentences would be softened. The court's decision provoked a storm of discontent. These people came out for justice, for the nation. They could have stayed home, but not only did they come out, but demanded a stop to lawlessness. They were against bloodshed. They didn't want children to be orphaned and wives to be widowed. They wanted peace and quiet in the country, so they took that step and are now serving time for it. There is no justice here, no truth. We are just wanderers in this land because Nazarbayev behaves himself like that. He isn't held responsible for anything. He only does as he pleases. In anticipation of the appeals hearing in the case of oil workers on strike, employees of the Burgalau company, which constructs oil wells, stopped work for 2 hours last Wednesday in solidarity of the convicted oil workers. Friends and family of those convicted are planning to organize a demonstration in downtown Zhanaozen and have filed an application to the local administration. According to Zhanaozen residents, the central square was cordoned off for 2 days in a row and internal forces were reimposed. The city administration confirms the information and explains their presence as a means to maintain public order. The number of units is not indicated.
This past week, the prosecutor's office of the Mangistau region appealed the acquittal of the former Zhanaozen mayor Orak Sarbapeyev. The prosecutor's press statement says the appeal will be considered by the Mangistau Regional Appeals Court, which will look into legality of the initial ruling. It is hard to tell what led this development, a quest for truth or an attempt to save the face of the general prosecutor who was absolutely confident about the criminal deeds of the local city administration just in January. The intensification of social tension and ongoing strike of oil workers, which escalated into mass riots, were caused by illegal actions of state local officials and heads of oil companies. The financial police was able to establish that these individuals, in spite of interests of city residents, for several years in a row were embezzling state funds which were provided for the social support of local population and oil workers. According to the investigation, the embezzlements were made by the former and current mayors of Zhanaozen, Babakhanov and Sarbapeyev, via public funds Zhana Ashir and Zharliktau. These funds accumulated the sponsorship of Kazmunaygas, which was aimed at providing social support to the city residents. Substantial amount of money was cashed and embezzled. The indicated state officials and heads of these funds were brought to criminal liability. The case of yet another representative of the local administration, namely the former governor of the Mangistau region, Amangildi Aytkulov, was also sent to court. The press service reported that the hearings have yet to be scheduled, but will likely start next week. Aytkulov is charged with taking bribes for construction contracts while serving as the first deputy director of Ozhenmunaygas in 2008 and as the deputy governor of the region in 2009. Aytkulov is the highest-ranking official involved in Zhanaozen case. According to the observer's forecasts, the court may punish him to mitigate the aftertaste left by the soft sentences given to Babakhanov and full acquittal of Sarbapeyev. Yerlan Kaliyev, a Zhanaozen 2011 committee member who is following the court trials in Aktau from the very beginning, has more to say on the matter. If there is a motive and a corpus delicti, there is a question arising who benefited from this, workers who were shot or those who were imprisoned. This was absolutely not of any benefit to them. Let's recall the chronicle of those events, the burnt and looted stores by unidentified individuals, and during the trial this was not even raised. And I, as an observer, have a question. Who looted the stores, even though we live in the 21st century and every store is equipped with surveillance cameras? Nevertheless, for 5 months there were preparations there with a special investigative team organized by an order of the general prosecutor. This shows the status of the investigation team. And I want to know, as a citizen, who looted those stores. They provided us with 4 people, with one master of sports, Shabov, who picked up 2 pens, another young man who presumably stole 2 wine bottles from the building of the city administration. And is that what they call multi-billion losses and embezzlement? Multikov gave testimonies at the Zhanaozen trial that on the 14th in the morning he headed a unit of 115 Aktau police policemen who arrived to Zhanaozen waiting for further orders 2 days prior to the mass riots. Zhanaozen Police Department had 229 pistols and around 32 machine guns. These firearms were distributed in a rush a month prior. Anyone could take it without any registration. Can you imagine? This is MIA with very strict discipline, and somehow this is being allowed. In some cases, one policeman could take several firearms at once, and this led to confusion during ballistics. No one could identify who exactly made the indicated shots. Policemen were given an order to gather near the police department in haste, and everyone disappeared instantly. And even during the trial it was voiced, and the accused Dasmagambetov in his testimony said that he saw Kazmunaygas office in fire, where all the documents were kept on the second floor. I suppose that workers went to extinguish the fire too, because the elimination of documents of the accounting office, for instance, was not for the benefit of workers, as without these documents they would not be able to prove their rightness. Most likely this conflict was in the interests of those who control Ozhenmonagas and those who give orders to the city administration and law enforcement. For 7 months the workers were able to stand due to their discipline. They might not have some legal base or substantiation, but it was impossible to disperse them because they gave no cause. So it seems that Sarbapeyev had a task to emotionally destabilize them. And as we remember from the trial, the court was paying much attention to the emotional condition of workers. So the idea was to set up yurts and push them away from the square. They were able to cope with that, so the anticipated effect failed. They failed to clash the local population with oil workers. So they used another provocation method. They gathered a crowd of around 200 children and brought them to the square, and police was providing security for this march of children, and Uteshev was shouting that striking oil workers are not allowing people to celebrate, and the normal reaction to this was that strikers were outraged, as this was not a private party but a state celebration. Moreover, their wives and children were among the crowd. I have nothing against this man, and personally I even respect him in a way, because he was the only state official who admitted that he sincerely supported the oil workers and their demands. Moreover, he also said that it was he who proposed to bring negotiators from abroad as well, to involve political parties into the process. But let's look at the facts. He was a state official and he was responsible for the city. He had enough power to not let this conflict to happen. He bears moral and civil responsibility for what happened. Where are the representatives of companies? Where is the local administration that did nothing for 7 months? And why only one side of the conflict is being punished while the other party that caused the bloodshed is resting on its laurels? We all bear moral responsibility, because we, the people who represent the only source of power according to the constitution, in one way or another are responsible for what happens in our country. Next on Vlast KZ. Defending Private Chelov. The defense asked for a new investigation of the incident at the Arkan-Kergen border outpost. Banned poetry. The Culture Ministry is against the creative idea of the Azatik radio. Stay tuned, Vlast KZ will return after a short break.
Главные события в Казахстане. Достоверные факты. Эксклюзивные комментарии. Читайте в Казахстане информационно-аналитический портал «Республика». Чтобы обойти блокировки, воспользуйтесь доменом respublikas.info. Вы окажетесь на так называемом прокси-портале. Специально разработанные канадскими специалистами по интернет-технологиям, прокси-порталы помогают пользователям получать информацию в тех странах, где блокируют интернет-ресурсы. В Китае, Иране, в Казахстане. Вы принимаете условия использования системы и попадаете на страницу информационно-аналитического портала «Республика». Материалы интернет-портала также доступны пользователям всемирной сети Facebook. facebook.com/respublika.kaz. Если вы хотите поделиться информацией, вам есть что рассказать, звоните в редакцию «Республики». Наши телефоны в Казахстане +7 727 273 92 95, в Москве +7 495 621 87 03.
Новости Казахстана на казахском языке смотрите в 21:00 и далее каждый нечетный час. Новости Казахстана на русском языке в 22:00 и далее каждый четный час. Новости Казахстана на английском языке смотрите в 16:30, 17:30, 18:30 и 19:30 со вторника по субботу. Время Астаны. Изготовление и размещение рекламы на канале KplusTV.
Private Chelah's abandonment of his prior confession brought the investigators of Arkan-Kirgen outpost massacre to a deadlock. According to the results of the forensic psychiatric examination, Vlast KZ was found absolutely sane. Immediately after the first meeting with the border guard, his attorneys reported that the soldier made his previous confessions under pressure, and therefore it is time to launch the new investigation of the case. Vladislav's lawyers have already requested the general prosecutor to do so, and also to replace the current investigation team.
We demanded the presence of journalists here, but they did not want to. They refused. It's not allowed, period. On Friday, relatives of the border guards killed in Arkan-Kirgen outpost arrived in Nusharal, a small town near the Chinese border. They say that the border service leadership was against having media around. The relatives of victims failed to receive answers to their numerous questions. Even upon the visit, we have not received specific answers. We were told that forensic examinations were performed and the leadership will be here. However, no one showed up. In the meantime, despite the fact that not all results of the examinations were revealed yet, a memorial stone was placed in Arkan-Kirgen. After the investigation, the monument will be replaced with one in Nusharal, honoring the dead. However, the families of victims don't seem to approve the military's actions. We do not allow erecting monuments to those who haven't been identified yet. Maybe they are still alive. Meanwhile, Vlast KZ was ruled to be sane according to results of the psychological examination. The lead that he was acting in the blurred mental state has collapsed. Immediately after KZ has been discharged from the psychiatric hospital, he suddenly changed his position. The border guard renounced his testimonies and made a statement that the Arkan-Kirgen post was attacked. Yet the military prosecutors have interpreted this merely as an attempt to evade responsibility.
После проведения этой экспертизы состоялась консультация с его.
After this examination was performed, we had a consultation with his lawyers, and then KZ filed two petitions. The first one said that he refuses to participate in the investigation. The second petition said that he renounces his testimonies given earlier. The defendant is entitled to do so. Therefore, I believe this is simply a line of defense. KZ's new lawyers, who were allowed to visit him for the first time, reported that the soldier seems to be a decent and trustworthy person. They reconstructed the incident according to KZ. He testified the private Aganas, the sentry on guard, came running to inform him that they had been attacked. They heard shots from the barracks. Then KZ and Aganas allegedly ran away from there. Later, Aganas somehow was left behind, and KZ did not see him afterwards. Another KZ's lawyer explains that previous testimonies were given under psychological pressure. KZ was threatened that something terrible may happen to him in the detention center. First, if he pleads guilty, they will mitigate his punishment and he will not receive life in prison. Second, he was threatened to be raped in the detention center unless he would confess to a crime, and they can easily arrange that. It's impossible to receive any information from the investigation, people say. This allows for a variety of leads to appear. One thing is clear, the families of border guards killed on Arkan-Kirgen outpost don't believe that KZ is guilty.
Мы не верим, что он сам один может убить всех, потому что они все вместе жили.
We do not believe that he alone could kill everyone. They were friends who lived and ate together for 6 months. First, they said he was insane. Then he turned out to be the opposite. So now they have another plan. We do not know whom to believe.
Он все сделал, по плану все сделал. А раньше говорили по-другому. Мы кому верите, кому не верите, мы ничего не знаем теперь.
According to relatives, there were no hazing. The letters they used to receive were always positive. One of the border guards was even saying in his letter that he gained weight. We talked to him personally. He's very open. He would have told us if he wasn't feeling well. Kazakh human rights activists also expressed their doubts. They could have provided the entire video recording of interrogations and other investigation activities as evidence that Chelak was not subjected to any tortures. However, it's not clear whether the investigation will reveal this information. If there are no video recordings of all interrogations of Chelak from the beginning to an end, and preliminary investigation bodies only represent some short fragments that we've seen here, I would assume that tortures indeed took place in the form of psychological pressure. On Saturday, 60 relatives of the victims who arrived in Usharal visited the scene of the tragedy. They were promised to have some of their questions answered. A memorial stone was part of the event as well. However, the families of border guards whose names the border service is so quick to set in stone are not even sure if their close ones are actually dead. Grieving people desperately rushed to the psychics, and they all said that 6 or 7 border guards from the list are still alive. Even though we've received the coffin, they said that he is alive. We've been to 10 different psychics, and they all say that the boys are in captivity, being transferred someplace. Why would they say so if the person is dead? They do not trust the results of the medical examination either. Zauresha Ilyasova, the aunt of one of the killed border guards, showed the issued certificates. She says the genetic examination was carried out in an amazingly short period of time. It normally takes at least 2 weeks for the forensic examination, whereas this one took only 6 days. Zauresh noted that even examination results are questionable. For instance, she pointed out the dental crowns indicated in the certificates, which her nephew simply never had. Besides, upon consulting with experts, she learned that it takes an extremely high temperature to burn the human skull to ashes. It takes 2 days to do so, even in the incinerator. Nevertheless, most of Zhanat Ilyasov's skull was not located.
The creative idea of Azatik Radio to hold a chat ITIS, a live chat mixed with traditional improvisation battle of poets, was rather welcomed by poets but not so by officials of the Culture Ministry. Poets were simply instructed against the participation in the new project. The ministry is allegedly trying to secure the purity of the genre, but in reality it looks like masked censorship. The Radio Azatik project named Chat ITIS was to be launched this week. A 16-member list of participants was formed and they were all paired up. However, the Culture Ministry chimed in at the last moment. An hour before we reached the Akins Irangayip and Yerkebulan over the phone, suddenly they told us they can't participate. They were in the middle of the meeting. An ITIS department within the ministry was set up, headed by Jursin Yerman, and it prohibited them from taking part in the Azatik project. They are too busy. The Astana Akın Yerkebulan agreed to participate in Azatik's project right away. He was the first to complete after a toss-up, but the meeting of the Ministry of Culture made him change his tune entirely. ITIS in written form is allowed, but only for a small audience. But if it is done on a national level, when everyone, including foreigners, are watching, then the approach has to be more serious. We need to make better preparations. I believe that in the interest of preservation tradition, the competition needs to be held on stage only. The poet Jursin Yerman has been organizing the ITIS for years. He heads the very ITIS department within the Ministry of Culture that prohibited chat ITIS on Azatik. Jursin Yerman worries that ITIS is being organized left and right without discrimination. That is the reason why he didn't allow the Akins to participate on the radio show. The fact that ITIS is now under the government's patronage doesn't worry the poet. He is convinced it will only benefit the national genre. Yerman strongly believes that poets will not become Akorda's mouthpiece. Let's not talk about what is and isn't allowed in ITIS. I have yet to see an official dictate that rules. They only tell us, let us help you create conditions. Why be upset with this kind of government? No one can silence poets. If a poet is indeed talented, he will say his last word no matter what. However, Mr. Yerman is contradicting himself. 2 years ago, when he organized the ITIS in Astana, he openly announced Akorda's demands towards a competition among the Alkins. Back then, the media wrote that a non-independent ITIS was held in Kazakhstan in honor of Independence Day, with support from the Ministry of Culture and under the watchful eye of the President's administration. Prior to the ITIS, Deputy Chief of Staff Maulen Ashimbayev gathered all the Akins and held a discussion. He asked them to refrain from blanket criticism and only do so if they have something constructive to say. Other than that, sing more about the country's and its leaders' achievements. The honored guests at the ITIS 2 years ago were officials close to the president, Kanat Saudubayev and Maulen Ashimbayev. Samru Kazana allocated more than $500,000 to conduct the event. He who pays the piper calls the tune. Today's ITIS must glorify our statehood and our leaders. Aysaule is one of the participants of the failed Azatlık project. She relocated to Kazakhstan from China. Back in her mother country, she is perplexed by the authorities' attitude towards national art. How many years has the ITIS been off the TV screens? It is a sign that government officials do not care about the tradition of ITIS. It is not like that in China. The Chinese respect and revere the ITIS. In fact, they support and organize it. Jambul Jabayev's great-grandson Alimkul Ata visits his legendary ancestor's grave every Friday with his own great-grandson and a dombra by his side. Alimkul Ata devoted 50 years of his life to the national genre. He says that even under a totalitarian regime, the ITIS didn't experience pressure from above. It was the other way around. In Soviet times, we competed one collective farm versus another, one region versus the next. We spoke out about every shortcoming. I once competed against a poet from the Degeres village. They didn't have a bridge and I criticized the fact. After that, the director of the state farm and secretary of the regional committee, who were at the ITIS, built the bridge.
Ауылына жекеңнің, бүгінгі күн кегенің. Құтты болсын сондырдың, интернаттық өнерінің. Ендігі бір кезекті, шөбірім енді қасымда. Ерсұлтанға кезекті, енді бір енді аяу, ау берен
Suimbai and Jambul's songs are included in Alimkul Azata repertoire. Now the elder passes all his knowledge and skills to his 13-year-old great-grandson, Yersultan. He wants him to be honest and conscientious. Because ITIS is not just an art of verse, it is the main institution of democracy of the steppe, which remains in place to this day, even after years of trials and tribulations. Last time ITIS ended up in spotlight was back in February, when a 2-day-long contest dedicated to the 100-year anniversary of Dinmuhammed Kunayev was held among Kazakh improvisers in Almaty. The star of the contest was Baurjan Kaliollah from Uralsk. In his improvised poetic rant, he criticized Nursultan Nazarbayev for Janauzen tragedy and asked the head of state why he paid no attention to oil workers during their 7-month-long strike, only coming to visit them after the massacre.
И приехал только после кровавой бойни. In May,
the poet told press that he survived an armed assault near his house in Uralsk after being shot with a traumatic weapon. Baurjan linked the assault with his creative work, but preferred not to file a report to the police. However, in his interview to Azatlık Radio, Baurjan said that he knew who was behind the attack. After the incident, the poet refuses to meet with journalists and went completely silent.
После этого случая поэт отказался от встреч с журналистами и замолчал. То выступление Бауржана...
Baurjan's performance perhaps was the best thing to happen to Kazakhstan's art stages this whole year. His tears represented the nation's grief. The poet has suddenly resurrected the original meaning of the concept akın, the folk poet-singer.
Вы смотрели программу «Власть KZ» на канале KplusTV.
You were watching Vlast KZ. We will return after a short summer break on August 26. Thank you for watching us, take care and see you soon.
Этот год. Всего вам доброго и до новых встреч.